Order, order. We have a motion on the committee selection. Whip to move.
Thank you, move.
Question is on the order paper. As many of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. We start with questions. Secretary of State for Energy, Security and Net Zero, Imam Mohammed.
Question number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Good morning, Mr. Speaker. This is a matter for the Treasury, although we remain closely engaged. The UN Framework Convention is focused on improving effective and inclusive international tax cooperation, not on creating specific global taxes on oil and gas companies.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The combined market value of the 6 big oil super majors soared by over $130 billion since the first US-Israeli attack on Iran. While my constituents of Dewsbury and Batley and constituents across the country face higher bills. So will the Energy Secretary and the Government work with international partners to establish global taxes on the fossil fuel industry through the UN Tax Convention and to help bill payers with their energy costs?
Well, as I said in my opening answer, this is a matter for the Treasury, but we obviously look closely at where we can cooperate around the world. The windfall tax that's been in place in this country has raised £12 billion, which has funded public services and funded the support to his constituents and to many other constituents with the cost of living. We will continue to invest that in bringing down bills, but we'll also invest in the infrastructure that gets us off fossil fuels.
Question 2, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Sorry, Mr. Speaker. We are delivering the biggest upgrade to the grid since the 1960s, using strategic plans to identify where new capacity is needed and accelerating infrastructure build. In West London, network operators have used innovative measures to help new developments to connect, despite exceptionally high growth in electricity demand.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the Minister for that response. As well as grid capacity for much-needed new homes and infrastructure like Hillingdon Hospital, capacity is also needed in West London for large numbers of new data centres which are being proposed at a regional level. What actions are being taken to strategically coordinate these demands and, crucially, to secure local benefits like jobs and heat capture to lower bills in local homes which are present through a local planning system in Hillingdon and not being secured?
Minister.
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right that strategic planning of this infrastructure is crucial. That's why we're engaging in the first ever National Strategic Spatial Energy Plan, and from that will be a centralised plan for the future of the network so we can plan it strategically. We're also looking at how we manage demand projects like data centres across the country so we get the greatest advantage from them. And on local benefit, he's absolutely right to highlight the benefits that can come from heat networks. We'll be carrying out heat network zoning to identify where waste heat can be reused into communities, which is a huge benefit for communities. But we're also, of course, delivering the jobs that go with the build of the network so that we've got manufacturing and infrastructure jobs here in the UK, which we've missed for many, many years.
Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The problem with West London Alliance, which comprises of 6 boroughs, is that because of the lack of grid capacity, new home development, new projects in terms of providing business opportunities, mean that that is frozen for a number of years into the 2030s. So unless there's urgent action to provide more power to the grid, all these excellent projects will be frozen for far too long.
Well, the honourable gentleman's framed it absolutely perfectly. This is the challenge we have. It's not just about being able to get clean power into homes and businesses, but on the demand side, how we can connect these really critical economic growth opportunities as well. Partly that's why we've cleared out the connections queue so that more projects can connect, and we've just launched a consultation on the demand side of that. So how do we reform the demand side of the queue? But fundamentally, we have to build more grid. We haven't built the grid that's needed since the 1960s. We're embarking on the biggest grid upgrade in a generation, and that's how we unlock the potential in communities like his, but right across the country.
Solly Kumar.
Question number 3, Mr. Speaker.
Serious State.
Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I'd like to answer this question 3, 4, 14, 18, 21 and 24 together. Families will be deeply concerned about the impacts they face as a result of the Iran conflict. This government is determined to fight people's corner. As a result of actions in the last budget, the energy bill price cap will fall from next week and is guaranteed till the end of June. We've already provided £50 million of immediate support for vulnerable customers who use heating oil. We'll act to prevent unfair practices like price gouging. Above all, we'll work to end this conflict, which is so essential and urgent for our national interest.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I'd like to thank the Secretary of State for his response. Given around 1 in 5 households in Dudley are in fuel poverty and electricity levies fall disproportionately on low-income families, I welcome the Chancellor's decision to move some social and environmental levies off electricity bills has helped shield some of my constituents from the impact of the war of the Middle East. Does my right honourable friend agree that rebalancing these levies can both support households and accelerate cleaner heating?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right about that, and it is an important reassurance for families at this time when people will be understandably worried that from April the 1st the energy price cap will fall by £117 thanks to the actions of this government. And this didn't just happen automatically, it happened because the Chancellor made decisions to raise taxes on the wealthiest in the budget, something opposed by the party opposite, which is making possible that relief for families, including in her constituency.
Liz Jarvis.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Before Trump's illegal war, we had Putin's illegal war. Now both have meant soaring energy bills for families and businesses in my constituency, and Citizens Advice Eastleigh tells me that more than 2,000 households are in fuel poverty. Does the Minister agree with me that so long as the price of wholesale electricity is directly linked to volatile gas, we will be at the mercy of despots and dictators, and that decoupling is essential if people in my constituency and across the UK are to have energy security?
She is absolutely right about our exposure to fossil fuels as a country. That is the legacy of the last government. I'm incredibly proud to say that as a result of our 2 record-breaking renewables auctions, 20 will power the equivalent of 23 million homes. She's also right to say that the decoupling of the price of gas and electricity is a very important issue which we are working intensively on.
James Wilde.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. 20,000 households across North West Norfolk and 140,000 across the county are off the gas grid and paying much higher prices for heating oil. Ministers are creating an expectation that support will be there for those who need it. So what action will the government be taking if Norfolk County Council is unable to meet the demand and provide support through the Crisis and Resilience Fund to those struggling?
Well, the honourable gentleman asked a really important question, and the reason we decided to put the money into the Crisis and Resilience Fund, essentially 3 weeks after this crisis began, was to get the money out the door quickly. It took 200 days in the last crisis. He asked an important question about both local authorities' provision of support and also what happens if they don't have the funds. That's something we are working intensively on and keeping closely in touch with them. We want the help to go to those who need it, and we want to work with local authorities to make sure it happens.
Mr Speaker, the latest wind auction has signed us up to sky-high prices for the next 20 years, but ministers are claiming that their internal analysis proves that this will bring bills down. So can I ask the Secretary of State to publish these calculations in full so we can see exactly how prices will be lowered?
We published the levelised cost analysis, which showed that new renewables were much cheaper to build and operate. But I have to say, Mr Speaker, as gas prices are soaring across the world and hitting us here at home, the idea that the party opposite still opposes our renewable auction, which gives us clean, homegrown power that we can rely on, is absolute nonsense.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Prime Minister stood on the steps of Downing Street and promised families their energy bills would fall by £300. And yet, since the general election, bills have gone up already by £73. They're forecast to go up more. So it's hardly surprising that my constituents don't really believe a word that they hear from those opposite benches. So can the Minister today explain to me, when will families in my constituency actually see that £300 saving delivered?
Good question.
Well, families in her constituency will see savings on their bills from next week, thanks to the actions of this government. And she's wrong on the facts. She's wrong on the facts, because if you look across 2025, bills are actually lower in real terms than in 2024. And I can tell her that by 2030, which is a manifesto commitment, we remain absolutely committed to cutting bills by up to £300.
Peter Fortune.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Secretary of State promised that Great British Energy would lead to mind-blowing reduction in bills. Can the Minister confirm how much the average family has saved as a result specifically of Great British Energy?
I'll tell him that across the country, and no doubt, I hope it will come to his constituency, there are public services across our country who are seeing reductions in the bills of schools and hospitals and money transferred to the front line. We on this side support those those proposals. We support lower bills. And as for his constituents, as I said to the honourable lady, he can look forward to them having lower bills as a result of this government's actions. Next.
Bill Esterson, Chair of the...
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are people who are saying that the way to bring down bills is to reach agreement with the oil and gas companies to charge less for gas in the North Sea. Isn't the problem with that argument that there is absolutely no way that those privately owned companies, or their shareholders, to be more accurate, will allow them to agree to a lower price than they can get elsewhere in the world?
Well, my honourable friend makes a really important and relatively basic point, which is gas is priced and sold on the international market. So whether it comes from the North Sea or is imported, is charged at the same price. And Mr. Speaker, sir, don't take my word for it, because it's what the Shadow Energy Secretary said when she was in post, that the more drilling wouldn't necessarily lead to lower energy bills.
Polly Billington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend will be aware that with this energy crisis, it does in fact offer potential opportunities to be able to shift further and faster on clean energy. Would he also consider an energy social tariff linked to the Warm Homes Plan to support those people who are most exposed to the volatility of fossil fuel prices, particularly not just those on benefits, but also the other vulnerable communities like the disabled?
Well, my honourable friend raises a really important point, and no doubt the Chancellor will cover this in her statement shortly, which is it is incredibly important that we protect the most vulnerable, particularly at this time. Now, I'm proud of the actions that we've taken to nearly double the number of people getting the Warm Homes discount, Mr. Speaker, to 6 million people. Very, very important action to get another £150 off people's bills. So in a sense, we have a form of a social tariff, but we keep looking, I can assure my honourable friend on this, we keep looking at how we can expand that and how we can help more families.
McKinnell.
Group on Warm Homes, which has been newly formed, and that Newcastle is leading the way with its hugely impactful Warm Homes local grant scheme run by Warm Works in conjunction with Newcastle City Council. Does the Secretary of State agree that we need to see more of these locally led grant schemes that are helping people to insulate their homes so that they can protect themselves from any incoming global insecurity that is going to impact their ability to heat their homes?
Well, first of all, let me congratulate Council on the great work that it is doing, Mr. Speaker. And we are putting hundreds of millions more this coming year into Warm Homes as part of our record-breaking investment in Warm Homes. And I think across the House, I hope we can agree on this, that investing in home upgrades is a way to have not just more energy efficiency, but to cut people's bills. And we are committed to going as far and as fast as we can.
Mike Reader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Secretary of State share my concern, perhaps my dismay, that at a time when families are concerned about the cost of energy, they're concerned about the price at the pumps, that the Conservatives have become obsessed with oil and gas licensing, not taking any action at all to actually reduce bills?
Well, my honourable friend makes a really important point, which is that they come here month after month making the same argument about something that is not going to reduce bills by a single penny. And it was they that said that during the last crisis. It's they that said that when they were in government. This side is about reducing people's energy bills, the priority of the British people.
Shall the Secretary of State, Claire Coutinho?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government is taxing people up the wazoo and piling cost after cost onto their energy bills. People on £30,000 or £40,000 a year who are not well off are being hammered to pay for welfare when they're already working all hours to support their own families. Now we hear the Labour Party are about to go back to the taxpayer again to subsidise those on welfare, but their first port of call should be to adopt our cheap power plan. It would cut electricity bills by 20% for everybody by cutting green taxes and levies, and it wouldn't cost the taxpayer a penny. Why won't they?
Their plan is totally incredible, Mr. Speaker, and she knows it. Their plan on renewables is just to tear up the contracts, and they had 14 years to do it, and they didn't do it. Why? Because they know they can't. But I have to say to her, if she's talking about tax, it is quite extraordinary that her position is now to abolish the windfall tax, which has raised £12 billion since it was introduced in 2022. The difference between us and them is that we're willing to tax the oil and gas companies to help ordinary families.
Gideon Amos, Liberal Democrats.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Despite solar and wind being freely available, only 15% of renewables are subject to contracts for difference that effectively control prices. Given the conflict in the Middle East is set to add up to £300 to bills, isn't it time the government addressed this Trump tax by transferring all renewables onto contracts for difference as part of our Liberal Democrat plan to halve energy bills?
Well, we are driving forward with contracts for difference, and obviously we're looking at the specific proposal he talks about. Let me just say on the more general point, though, that he makes, which is absolutely he is right about this. Rolling out renewables at speed, solar, wind, all types of renewables, is the best way we can insulate ourselves from global economic shocks, a point we have consistently made and sadly is being borne out by the events we see around the world.
Mr. Speaker, as a former member of the task force, I well remember the Conservatives cancelling the zero-carbon homes programme. Presumably, they want homes to be colder, more difficult to heat and more expensive. So we welcome on these benches the enactment of my honourable friend, the member for Cheltenham's proposals today for solar panels on all new homes. Jan and Jeanette from my constituency, CPR Somerset, have pointed out that if that was extended to car parks and commercial buildings, that would generate as much electricity as 15 Hinkley Point power stations. Would the Secretary of State extend the solar panels requirement to car parks and commercial buildings?
Well, first of all, I accept his congratulations on our announcement of the Future Home Standard today, which is a really, really important measure. It should never have been abolished by the last Conservative government. On the question of warehouses and car parks, we are absolutely looking at how we can roll that out more swiftly, particularly on the warehouse question. There is so much unused space that could be used to help cut bills right across the country.
Go White.
Question number 5, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. So fusion energy really is the energy of the future. And our fusion strategy, with a fusion prospectus to follow, has a very strong focus on inward investment, very much ensuring that Britain is the world-leading place to invest in fusion energy.
Joe White.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last December, Donald Trump's Media and Technology Group purchased a Californian-based fusion energy company, putting his son, Donald Jr., on the board in a $6 million deal. The race for fusion energy production is on. So will the Minister join with me in welcoming the appointment of Ilios Consortium, led by Kier and Nuvia, to construct the fusion power plant in North Nottinghamshire? I'm sure he will agree with me this will mean jobs and new skills and training for my constituency and beyond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do indeed welcome the design and build contract, a £200 million contract to Ilios. As she mentions, Kier and firms like Turner and Townsend, who can be relied on to deliver. We've allocated £1.3 billion over the spending review period for fusion, and this is an area where Britain has firmly been in the lead in research. We need to be in the lead in application too. I know her constituents will benefit, but of course right now it would be difficult for constituents in Scotland to benefit because the SNP can't decide whether fusion energy is nuclear energy or not. I can tell them it is, and they should be supporting nuclear energy across the whole country.
Jamie Stone.
Mr. Speaker, I think the Treasury bench would be particularly disappointed if I didn't once again showcase what we have at Dounreay, a licensed site, a skilled workforce and a population would greatly support playing a role in the development of fusion for the future. Can I also say that I think the Scottish Enterprise Network might put their hands in the pocket to bring this one forward if that's helpful to His Majesty's Government.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I can tell him I share his affection for Dounreay. I have family based in both Ray and Thurso, and I've enjoyed many a holiday on the north coast of Scotland. There is, as he says, a very talented and experienced nuclear workforce there, and I would very much hope that they would play a part in Britain's nuclear future.
Stephen Gunn.
Number 6, please, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Government knows that energy bills in Scotland remain too high, and that's why we're fighting the corner of consumers. And the action that we took at the budget will ensure that from April the price cap will fall by 7% or £117, and this is fixed until the end of June. This obviously is in addition to support being offered for vulnerable heating oil customers in Scotland and the expansion of the warm home discount, which means £92 million in annual funding for Scottish consumers.
Mr Speaker, Scotland's one of the most energy-rich countries in Europe, and the Treasury and UK Government have benefited to the tunes of hundreds of billions as revenues have flowed over the years. Yet bill payers in Scotland pay amongst the highest prices in Europe. Now, Labour promised that bills would be hundreds of pounds lower than where they are, and 2 years into government they follow the failure of successive Westminster governments in terms of resilience and bills. Wouldn't Scotland be better off looking after its own energy resource?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Bills are going down from next week by 7%, but, Mr Speaker, we don't need to imagine a future with independence and what would happen with the SNP in power. Let's look at the records. His party promised a publicly owned energy company 6 years ago. We delivered GB Energy within 18 months. His party scrapped fuel poverty targets. We are lifting 1 million households out of fuel poverty by the end of this Parliament. And, Mr Speaker, while his party and government in Scotland abandoned their heat and buildings bill, this government is making the biggest ever upgrade to home efficiency through the Warm Homes Plan with £15 billion of spending.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Does the Minister agree with me that one of the reasons that we need to see lower energy bills in Scotland and that's been blocked is the SNP's ideological objection to nuclear power? In particular, I recently received a written answer from the Minister for Energy regarding a study by GB Energy to assess Scotland's full potential for nuclear power. Will the Minister work with his colleagues to make sure that analysis is published as quickly as possible so the people of Scotland can see exactly how much we are missing out to thanks to the SNP's ideological objection to nuclear power and how much people are suffering as a result?
That is a crucial point that my honourable friend made, and I know he is an advocate for nuclear in Scotland, just as I am. We are missing out on the opportunities of nuclear, and it's a disgrace that 1,300 Scottish nuclear workers have to move south every week just to get employment in the nuclear industry. So I hope that the Scottish National Party reverse their ideological ban on nuclear power as soon as possible.
Question number 7, Mr Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Methane harvested from landfill sites enables the generation of around 2.5 terawatt-hours a year, around 1% of the UK's electricity. Many of these assets receive a subsidy through the renewables obligation, which expires in 2027. This generation has a supportive but limited effect on energy security, and given the high impact of methane, my department and DEFRA are considering long-term solutions to landfill gas methane capture and appropriate transitional arrangements.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. At a time when families are already under pressure from high energy bills, what assessment has he made of the risk that without action before April 27, declining landfill gas generation will undermine energy security and increase costs for consumers?
Minister.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for raising the point. I would just reiterate that although methane harvested from these sites and used to generate electricity plays a role in the generation of electricity, it's less than 1% overall. So it's not an issue for our energy security. And as the sites age, the amount of methane that they emit reduces. The reduction has been factored into our plan. So we are looking at what transitional arrangements are needed, both to deal with the methane issue and to deal with the electricity that's generated from it, and we'll consult in due course.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I thank the Minister, as always, for his answers. It's very important that we all get the advantage of, in relation to the levels of methane harvested from landfill sites. In Northern Ireland, of course, we have landfill sites as well, ones that create a lot of rubbish and thereby a lot of methane possibilities. So can I ask the Minister, I know he's a regular visitor to Northern Ireland and he goes over there often, can I ask him what discussions he's had with the relevant Minister in Northern Ireland to ensure that we can get the advantages of what the Honourable Gentleman has replied to the Honourable Lady? Thank you.
Minister.
Well, I always thank the Honourable Gentleman for his kind comments, and my visits to Northern Ireland are important to me. The very first reconstituted meeting of the Ministerial Working Group on this, we had a conversation about this exact question, about how we support the reduction of methane across the UK and how we can support that through the electricity system. Clearly this is transferred in Northern Ireland, but it's conversations that I continue with colleagues in the Executive.
Morgan.
Number 8, please, Mr Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The nationally significant infrastructure project regime provides a clear consenting route for nationally significant electricity lines, but processes have been too slow and we are determined to change that. Our reforms support the faster delivery of infrastructure, essential for strengthening our energy security in periods of global instability, while maintaining a robust and proportionate consenting process.
Helen Morgan.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Green Gen Cymru, which is a sister company of Butte Energy, is in the latter stages of a very controversial process to secure planning consent for power lines from Vyrnwy to Frankton, the Vyrnwy-Frankton connection. And the problem is that there isn't a substation at Lower Frankton in North Shropshire with which to connect those lines to. Now, we are expecting that proposal to come through later in this year. But given Butte Energy's widely reported links to the Labour Party and National Grid's obligation to connect new infrastructure to the grid, how can the Minister reassure my constituents that the whole process isn't predetermined?
Minister?
Well, first of all, can I say that processes that are going through a live application process, I'm obviously not going to comment on from the dispatch box. I've met a number of MPs to talk about this issue previously. We're looking at all the information that's available. In terms of individual energy companies as part of this mix, Ofgem has a role in regulating them, and I'm not quite sure what our final point had to do with a particular planning application, but I'm happy to write to her on it.
Chris Barrett.
Number 9, Mr Speaker.
Mr Speaker, the UK benefits from a strong and diverse energy supply with only 1% of our crude oil and gas coming from the Gulf. But the essential lesson of this conflict is that while we're dependent on fossil fuel markets, we're exposed as a country, with prices for oil and gas, wherever it comes from, set on the international market and affecting families and businesses. For our energy security, the answer must be to go further and faster towards homegrown, clean power we control.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The reason our energy security is so exposed to events in the Middle East is because we have relied on oil and gas for too long. Fossil fuels not only cause climate change, but we buy them on the open market, so no further drilling in the North Sea would mitigate this. The only true path to energy security is through renewables and nuclear. So can the Minister set out how this country will do that so that in future energy crises our country's security is less exposed?
The North Sea will continue to play an important role in our energy mix for decades to come, which is why we said in our manifesto we'd keep existing oil and gas fields open for their lifetime, including, as we announced last autumn, the use of so-called tiebacks. But on the wider point my honourable friend makes, he is absolutely right. That's why we've got the largest nuclear building programme in half a century. That's why we've had 2 record-breaking renewables auctions, and that's why we recently announced we'll bring forward our next renewables auction to July, because we need to get away from fossil fuel markets and off our dependence on them as soon as possible.
Mr McVeigh.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Given the recent jump in the price of oil, would it not be good for the UK economy, jobs and the government tax receipts to maximise drilling for North Sea oil, like Norway does, rather than phasing it out and closing those sites down because of this government's, and particularly the Secretary of State's, left-wing dogma?
I disagree with the honourable lady on that one. Look, I said in my answer to my honourable friend, we're going to use existing North Sea oil and gas fields for their lifetime. I think she's referring to the question of exploration licences. What everybody says is exploration licences make no material difference to production levels. And on the tax question, I do urge her, I hope she'll carry on supporting the windfall tax and tell her front bench this will be the wrong time to abolish the windfall tax.
Whereas, Mr Speaker, well, I've rarely been called an extreme left-winger, but there's always a first. In rural and coastal Britain, there's deep worries amongst families about the conflict and the effects of the conflict in the Middle East on oil prices, and we really welcome the 53 million that's been announced to support them. But does the Minister agree with me that those calling for an expansion of reliance on oil and gas wholesale prices offer absolutely no long-term solution to energy security?
Well, he's right. They offer no short-term or long-term solution to the problems of energy security, and they want to fly in the face of all the evidence. And as I said before, Mr Speaker, it's the last government that said more UK production of North Sea oil and gas would make no difference to the global price of gas. And it's really important that the House understands that.
Richard Tice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Secretary of State has just misled, inadvertently I'm sure, the House. Can he explain, with regard to the price of gas, Mr. Speaker, why the price of gas in the United States is about a third of the price of gas here in the UK? It's because they use it domestically, isn't it, Secretary of State?
No, it's not that. And I have to say to the honourable gentleman, he's entitled to his own opinions, but he's not entitled to alternative facts. And what the last government said, and what this government said, and what every sensible economist says, is that more production, his idea of more drilling, or drill every last drop, or drill baby drill, would be precisely the wrong thing for our country, because it will make no difference to the price. The answer is homegrown, clean renewables that we control.
Shadow Minister Andrew Bowe.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In the face of further geopolitical turmoil, now is the time to alter our approach to energy. Drilling in the North Sea and scrapping carbon taxes on British manufacturing would kickstart economic growth, tackle unemployment, as well as prevent further deindustrialisation. Does the Secretary of State agree with those comments from the Labour Member of Parliament for Mid and South Pembrokeshire?
Mr. Speaker, what I would say to him and to others is that this party, this government, is taking a pragmatic approach to these issues. We are using existing oil and gas fields for their lifetime, including with tiebacks, welcomed by industry. But what we're not going to do is fly in the face of the evidence. The answer to a fossil fuels crisis is not to double down on fossil fuels. The answer is to double down on clean, homegrown power we control. They used to believe that, Mr. Speaker, before they jumped on another bandwagon.
Mr. Speaker, it is extraordinary, mad. Even no other country on earth would deprive itself of the vast natural resource we are lucky enough to have at our disposal underneath the North Sea. The Jackdaw field alone could provide 250 million barrels of oil equivalent in natural gas to the UK, and it could be up and running by Christmas. But because the Secretary of State, it is stuck in limbo. It is utter insanity. His inaction is an act of national economic self-harm. When will he make a decision and act in the national interest?
Well, look, before he self-combusts, Mr. Speaker, as a result of the court decision, those projects are proceeding at risk. But I'll tell you the way we'll make a decision. I'm not going to comment on a live planning issue, but I will say in general, we will make a decision that is legally watertight. The last government made a series of decisions which were found, oh, no, they say, well, they don't care about the rule of law. And we saw that, Mr. Speaker, when they said we should rush headlong into a war with no regard for the impacts on our constituents.
Gibson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question 10.
Minister.
We are taking a strategic approach to planning grid capacity and having transmission build times through reforms to consenting, regulation and supply chains. And we're working with the National Energy System Operator and Ofgem to deliver on radical connections reform, prioritising those projects that are ready to connect, strategically aligned, and to speed up access to the grid nationwide.
Sarah Gibson.
I thank the Minister for his answer, but Mr. Speaker, the grid connections reform process was intended to improve investor confidence by removing the zombie projects and those that were shovel-ready projects, putting them into priority. Yet repeated delays from NESO mean that many developers are still waiting for their Gate 2 connection offers, even projects, Mr. Speaker, that are due to connect in 2026 and 2027. This is extremely damaging for investor confidence. Given the importance of the connection reform to the government's Clean Power 2030 ambitions, will the Minister tell us how the government is ensuring that NESO and the network companies are working at pace to issue those Gate 2 connections as soon as possible?
Minister.
Well, the Honourable Lady asks an incredibly important question, and I share the frustration, and I've reflected that frustration to all of those involved in this process. It's worth just remembering we had more than 600 gigawatts in a queue. This process has cleared out 300 gigawatts. That is incredibly complex to do, and it's the first time any country in the world has sought to do this. It's the first time we've done it. Clearly, we have learned a lot of lessons from that. It does now need to proceed much faster than it has to date. There is a clear timeline to that happening. The first Gate 2 offers are going out now. I will continue to be very closely involved in ensuring that that happens. It's a partnership now between NISO and the transmission owners to get those offers out the door, and I'll be doing everything I can to make sure that happens.
Number 11, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, after a lot of hullabaloo about the oil and gas industry, we now get to turn to the areas where we are doubling down on our vast natural resource in clean energy industries and offshore wind, where we've managed to attract £90 billion worth of private sector investment in 2024 in collaboration with the sector councils. And of course, whilst the Conservative government was happy for the jobs associated with that to be in Denmark and the Netherlands, we're reindustrialising Blythe, the Tyne and the Tees.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. AR7 was a resounding vote of confidence from developers, and our supply chains will welcome that. At a round table I hosted last year, the Secretary of State set out the innovative principles behind the clean industry bonus. However, competing against lower cost regions such as the Middle East remains a pressing concern for fabricators going into the future. Will the Minister ensure that the CIB is as robust and creative as possible so that developers buy from British yards?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My honourable friend is quite right. Allocation round was incredibly successful, and of course the opposition wanted to cancel it with their opposition to clean industry jobs across the UK. In the North East, where my honourable friend is from, we're forecasting 20,000 increase in jobs, and I know the Smoulders Yard in her constituency will seek to benefit that because, as the Chancellor of the Exchequer said, it matters to this government where things are made. And we do want to see these supply chain jobs here in the UK, supply chain jobs that the Reform Party would take away from constituents like hers and mine with their anti-net zero ideology.
Graham Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister will be aware that major hydrogen projects in the Humber area, including those led by National Gas, are ready to go. They're vital to our region, which has £18 billion of value add and employs 360,000 jobs. But without certainty from government, investors cannot commit. So when will the government open the allocation rounds for the hydrogen transport and hydrogen storage business models so this investment can actually move forward?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do appreciate his concerns, having spoken to the hydrogen industry myself, and I also appreciate the representation that he's made both to myself and the Energy Minister on this issue, and I can assure him that the hydrogen strategy will be out soon.
Angus MacDonald.
Number 12, please, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just allow me a moment to find the right page. We understand that many households, particularly in rural and off-gas grid areas, rely on heating oil as a primary source of heat, and that's why my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, has announced £53 million of support for those who heat their homes with heating oil. 4.6 million will be delivered by the Scottish Government. We obviously continue to monitor the situation closely and will keep measures under review.
Angus MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the Minister acknowledge that in the remote Highlands and Islands, where mains gas is not available, where we have the highest level of fuel poverty in Britain, where local households and business rely on heating oil and electricity, and where much of Britain's renewable energy is generated to minimal local benefit, would the Minister accept the unfairness that the Highlander is paying a multiple of those in cities for their energy?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The honourable gentleman makes a very important point. I've visited the Western Isles last week to speak directly to people who are being affected by the energy crisis and heard some of the pressures that are on people. It's why we have instructed, why we've welcomed the CMA's investigation into heating oil. And the point that he raises around people benefiting from local infrastructure, today we've announced a trial for free wind power for people who live near to those pieces of infrastructure. We launched that this morning, and he'll be able to find details about that in the vote office.
Mr. Speaker, I welcome the UK Government's support for heating oil customers in my constituency and the follow-up support from the Scottish Government. But I'm slightly baffled that the Scottish Government has chosen to centralise support through Advice Direct Scotland instead of entrusting local authorities. Will the Minister urge the Scottish Government to use local expertise, like Tehini Shigal, who we met last week, like Point and Sandwich Power, who have that local knowledge to find hard-to-reach customers, because we know in rural areas that people are very reluctant to come forward for support.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was pleased to join my honourable friend in Stornoway to meet those organisations last week, and it is absolutely crucial, whether it is through the local government schemes that we're running in England or through the centralised scheme that the Scottish Government is running, that they take advantage of local knowledge to make sure that this reaches the people that it needs to reach.
Mr. Speaker, in Aviemore tomorrow it's going to be snowing. In fact, in quite a lot of North Scotland it's going to be snowing to pretty low level. People in those areas are suffering hugely from massive energy prices, both electricity and heat and oil, and also LPG tank gas. The example I've got in Aviemore is a 2,500 litre tank that was filled in November for £1,400 is now costing £3,400 to fill. That is the differential that people are having to pay. Does the Minister agree that the £35 a household is, frankly, a drop in the ocean?
Yeah, a drop in the ocean. Totally, Minister.
I think the honourable member should be careful to not sow fear among his constituents on these issues, which is precisely what that does. My right honourable friend, the Chancellor, has provided £4.6 million to the Scottish Government. The Scottish Government have increased that to a £10 million fund. It's absolutely imperative that the Scottish Government tell honourable members in this House and also constituents how they are going to access this. The Scottish Government is delivering that scheme, that £10 million scheme, and they have told us it will be available from the 1st of April. It's for them to set out how that will get to people.
You want to stand back?
Mr. Speaker, around 30% of households in the Braes villages use alternative heating sources such as heating oil, far above the district, my constituency, or Scottish nationwide average. The Scottish Government's decision to deliver this scheme nationally instead of locally is creating anxiety that these communities may be forgotten by Holyrood. What assurances have ministers received from their Holyrood counterparts that the Scottish heating oil support will be proportionately available to communities such as the Braes villages?
Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome my honourable friend's advocacy for his constituents. It is essential that the Scottish Government scheme, which is running to support people with heating oil costs, finds its way to those people who need it. I am disappointed that they have not looked to work alongside local government and they have chosen to centralise that funding, but it is for them to set out how they will ensure that everyone is reached.
Smith, Shadow Minister.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I should declare an interest that my own home is off the gas grid and my boiler fuelled by domestic heating oil. I've listened to the answers that the Minister has given very carefully, and there are some significant gaps. There is no mention of LPG in the Minister's answers. He also, whilst it is always right to support the most vulnerable in our society, I'm not sure the Minister has fully understood that there are many households on modest incomes across rural communities not in receipt of benefits who simply don't have £500, £600, £700 lying around to meet a bill they had not budgeted for. But perhaps he could answer a specific question on certainty. Whilst the CMA investigation goes on, there is continuing to be the practice where customers are placing an order without knowing the price they will be charged when that oil is delivered. He could move an interim measure before a wider set of changes to stop that practice. Will he?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think I need to start by correcting some of what the honourable gentleman said. That in the statement that I gave last week, I confirmed that LPG was part of the support. Perhaps he didn't hear that. Our priority all the way through this crisis has been to ensure that funding reached people at speed. That's why we've delivered this within 2 weeks, not 200 days. And on his point around means testing, the funding is discretionary, so local authorities can decide how they provide that to people. On his final point, I think the honourable gentleman in the front bench also called for a CMA investigation. We are going to look and study the results of that to see what needs to happen with regulation in this industry. But it's clear that as an industry, as I said a number of times from this dispatch box last week, it's clear that the market is not functioning properly.
We go to Topical's Dr. Ross Savage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question number one.
Mr. Speaker, since conflict broke out in the Middle East, we've acted to prevent price gouging, help those reliant on heating oil and ensure businesses get a fair deal on their bills. The energy price cap will fall by £117 next week, with savings locked in until the end of June. We've also sped up work to take control of Britain's energy, accelerating our next renewables auction and our Warm Homes Plan. We'll do whatever it takes to fight people's corner and learn the right lessons of the crisis.
Dr. Ross Savage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Going back to the issue of heating oil, my constituency, the South Cotswolds, 20% of households rely on heating oil, which is 4 times the national average. and many face high upfront costs. Would the Secretary of State consider supporting more flexible payment or credit schemes and support potentially pooled purchasing models, for example, enabling villages to combine orders, secure bulk discounts and spread costs over time?
I believe this, the Honourable Lady raises a really important issue, and I'm sure many members in the House will empathise with the issue she raised, and indeed with constituents facing difficult times. My Honourable friend the Minister tells me that the CMA is looking at all of those issues, and I do want to say to her and all members in the House that if they have issues on heating oil or indeed on other practices that are going on, please do bring them to the attention of my Honourable friend, because we want to work as speedily as possible with the CMA to stamp them out.
Joyce Fenton-Glynn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Manufacturers have been grappling with energy costs long before the current Iran conflict, hitting Calder Valley firms like Siddle and Hilton, who make fences, who see costs 4 times higher than European competitors, and finishing company HC Whitehead, who've seen their energy bills double to £22,000 a month. So will the Minister please meet with me to discuss how we can support smaller firms and make sure that government support schemes help energy-intensive firms?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. He's right to point out the importance of the finishing companies, and I know that some of the spinning and weaving businesses are included in the supercharger, but finishing often isn't, even though it's in the same factory. And clearly, whether it's waterproofing for sou'westers or fireproofing for mattresses, these are important businesses. So I'd be very happy to meet with him, and perhaps we could discuss this upcoming supercharger review and what options there may be for those businesses.
So, Secretary of State, Coutinho.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Secretary of State be honest and tell the country why he is ideologically obsessed with shutting down the North Sea? Is it because he doesn't think we need the £25 billion of tax revenue it would generate? Is it because he prefers to import gas with higher emissions? Or is it because he has never bothered to speak to the thousands of workers who are losing their jobs right now because of his policies?
I'm not. As I said earlier, Mr. Speaker, we're using the North Sea for existing oil and gas fields in the North Sea for its lifetime, and we've introduced tiebacks to existing fields. But I do have to say to her, she comes here month after month with proposals that will do nothing to cut energy bills for people. It is this side that is actually taking action to reduce bills, reducing the energy price cap next week, making plug-in solar available to all families, having a warm homes plan to drive down bills, and crucially, a renewable power auction helping to 12 million homes, which she said we should cancel.
Mr. Speaker, Renewables UK, the unions, Tony Blair, his own hand-picked chair of Great British Energy, the biggest advocates for an energy transition, have said that he has got this wrong. Is his ideology so rigid he is incapable of admitting when he's got things wrong, that he'll put us on a pathway to higher emissions and fewer British jobs? So let's try this again. Can you be clear with the House? He knows we will need gas for decades to come. Why does he prefer to import dirtier gas from abroad than use the gas that we have in the North Sea?
I don't, and we continue to use the North Sea, and ours is the pragmatic position. But I do think there's a wider lesson here, Mr. Speaker, which the House has to focus on. Is the lesson of this crisis a fossil fuels crisis to double down on fossil fuels, or is it to drive forward with clean energy? We believe clean, homegrown power that we control is the answer.
Michael Wheeler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I welcome the upcoming drop in the energy price cap from next week and know that it will help my constituents in Worsley and Eccles. With the government's focus on the cost of living, we are all concerned that events in the Middle East will trigger a price shock in the market, making this work more difficult. Can the Minister outline what further steps the government is taking to reduce my constituents' energy bills?
I thank the honourable member for his important question. There's 3 additional measures that we are taking. We are expanding and extending the warm home discount to 2031. We have supported heating oil customers with £53 million worth of support that was announced last week. And our warm homes plan, our £15 billion warm homes plan, is the biggest home upgrade plan in British history. And all of this is wrapped up in our clean energy mission, Clean Power by 2030, which will ultimately give us control of our energy.
Stuart Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Over half of South Shropshire residents rely on heating oil or other solutions like LPG to heat their homes. The recent government support does very little for a majority of my constituents, and the best price today for heating oil is over double of what it was for 5 weeks ago. There is blatant profiteering. What is the government going to do to seriously address this issue?
Mr. Speaker, we moved swiftly to introduce funding for support for people, that £53 million worth of support which is being dispersed through the Crisis and Resilience Fund in England and Wales will provide support for people through this immediate period. We will keep other measures under review, but it is important that if honourable members have examples of unfair practices to do with price, that they report that to the CMA so that they can consider it as part of their review.
Callum Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I recently visited the Gorcock Fields Community Solar Project, which is a local solar farm which uses the income from the clean energy it produces to invest in energy-saving and environmental projects. And it's anticipated it will invest £2.8 million over 25 years. Can the Minister update the House on how it will be using the local power plan to ensure that even more of my communities, particularly rural and low-income ones, can take control of their own energy?
Well, I congratulate all those in my honourable friend's constituency for what sounds like a fantastic project, and it's an example of what we want to see all across the country. The local power plan unlocks £1 billion of investment with the ambition that communities right across the UK should be able to own and operate their own energy infrastructure, and the profits from that should flow into local communities.
Mr. Speaker, the energy bills crisis is a crisis right now. You might not know that from the response from the government benches today. Now, the Scottish Government's actions have helped deliver clean, renewable energy as a net exporter, bailing out the UK Government in terms of heating oil as well. Will they work together and will they respond positively to the First Minister's call for a four-nation summit?
Well, we do work very well together, actually. Contrary to what it might appear from his contributions, the Scottish Government works well with the UK Government. But I would say just this. He suggests, quite wrongly, twice now, that Scotland is generating all this electricity all by itself. Of course, those projects are funded by bill payers right across the UK, investing in that infrastructure. His plan, it seems to be, is to take a third off energy bills with independence, with absolutely no credibility whatsoever.
Mark Seward.
Mr. Speaker, small firms are being hounded by unregulated third-party energy brokers. So I welcome the Department's commitment to appoint Ofgem as the statutory regulator for TPIs. When will the Minister introduce this legislation, and how will the Department work with Ofgem to end cold calling and misrepresentation in the non-domestic market?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We heard from the responses to our 2024 consultation the concerns around the continued risk to consumers arising, as he says, from some of these TPIs. The Government plans to bring in new regulation of TPIs and will appoint Ofgem as the regulator who will be empowered to put in place rules to protect SMEs and other TPI customers.
Helen Morgan.
Speaker, in North Shropshire, around 15,000 households, including my own, are reliant on fuels like heating oil or LPG to heat them. These people have also hit hardest by rises at the petrol pumps because they don't have alternative forms of transport. Now, while everybody connected to mains electricity and gas benefits from the price cap, those of us who are off-grid have only been offered means testing support. So will the Government consider introducing a mechanism that will instigate a price cap on alternative fuels to ensure that rural and off-grid homes get the support that they deserve?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The support on offer is not means tested. It is the discretion of local authorities to decide the criteria for those applications. That's the first point. The second point is the CMA is investigating this in detail, and as my honourable friend the Secretary of State said earlier, if there are any examples, please bring them to my attention, please bring them to the CMA's attention so that they can be considered as part of that review.
Martin Rhodes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Terminally ill people often have to have additional energy needs and energy costs. What steps is the Department taking to support and help those people, the terminally ill, with increased energy costs?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome my honourable friend's advocacy for those people, and absolutely no one with a terminal illness should have to face concerns around their energy bills. I'll soon be meeting with the Minister for Health Innovation to discuss how government can better share data in order to target support at vulnerable people and those with health conditions.
Cooper.
Mr Speaker. Nith Inshore Lifeboat in my Dumfries and Galloway constituency has lost a sponsor who provided them with free fuel because of soaring costs. So will the Minister, the Secretary of State, go to the Chancellor and point out that VAT and fuel costs here indeed costs on fuel are a matter of life and death in remote and rural Scotland?
Well, the Chancellor will have heard his statements because she's actually in the room. But the thing that my right honourable friend is doing is providing support for people, but on a platform of fiscal stability, which that party would do well to understand.
Mr Speaker, the Minister knows that Stafford residents are passionate about solar power and they would like to see the government go further with a commitment to solar panels on all new car parks and industrial buildings like they see in Europe and in France particularly. Would the Minister agree with me that this policy would help reduce energy bills for homeowners as well as protect our rural land, and would he agree to meet with me to discuss my campaign?
Minister.
Well, I'm always very happy to meet with the Honourable Lady, so I will do that. But she's right to say this. We want to cover as many rooftops in the country as we possibly can with solar panels. And just today, we've announced that plug-in solar will be available in the UK in the summer, allowing renters and others across the world to go into a supermarket, buy some solar panels, plug them in and save money. That's part of what we want to see to bring down bills across the country.
Mr Speaker, the green firms that innovate the most, young firms, have been shown to be particularly credit constrained. Will the Minister meet with me to discuss what measures the government is taking to increase credit supply, raise research and development and increase economic growth?
Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Of course, we do now have record public sector investment in this technology development, £86 billion to 2030. As a techno-optimist myself, I agree with the IEA that we can now solve 75% of these problems using technology. And of course, I'd be happy to meet with him to discuss it further.
The UK depends on oil and gas. Global conflicts will continue to drive price hikes for my constituents in Bedford and Kempston who face soaring bills when the price cap ends in June. Does the Secretary of State agree that lower bills should come before company profits and levy a windfall tax against fossil fuel companies making billions from this crisis?
Well, as a result of the decisions that my right honourable friend the Chancellor made, we are raising significant sums from the windfall tax. We don't agree with the parties opposite that now's the time to abolish the windfall tax. We think it's really important revenue which can help many of our constituents.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We keep hearing an argument that it will take years, 5 to 10 years, for new oil and gas to flow, and therefore there's no point starting new drilling. But the operators themselves of Jackdaw and Rosebank say both could be producing by the end of the year. It only needs the Secretary of State to approve them. Why is he denying the UK this supply of domestic fuel?
Well, first of all, let me say those projects are continuing at the developer's own risk at the moment. They're subject to a process which her party would understand because it ended up in the courts under the previous government. We're dealing with that process. But ultimately, none of those projects would take a penny off bills, and that's the argument we're making here. They've got no plan for bringing down bills. We have.
Mr. Osborne.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Medway Maritime Hospital in my constituency is benefiting from £25.9 million investment to introduce heat pumps and other measures. Does he agree with me that we can invest in public sector provision to reduce bills in schools, hospitals and other buildings across the country?
I congratulate his local hospital, and I think what my honourable friend rightly shows is the way in which cheap, clean, renewable power can not just cut bills for families, but cut bills for our public services, which GB Energy is doing, and we can transfer money into frontline patient care.
Gregory Campbell.
Mr. Speaker, the Secretary of State will be aware of the very high dependence in Northern Ireland of home heating oil, and while there has been some help offered in the past 10 days from the government, has consideration been given to beyond the summer period if the crisis in the Middle East continues over the next few months?
Minister.
Thank the honourable member for that question. We've supplied £17 million to the Northern Ireland Executive, had a constructive conversation last week with Minister Archibald around how that's deployed. We'll keep other measures under review as the situation develops.
Final question, Jen Kirkham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to firstly thank the Minister for his focus on securing UK private investment in critical minerals, which is fantastic to see. And I know the Secretary of State agrees that Cornwall is vital for future UK energy security.
Yes, it is.
We have had one test and demo model in the Celtic Sea come forward in AR7. I want to ask the Secretary of State about AR8, the timing of AR8, and whether he will look again at test and demo models in the Celtic Sea so we can really use that energy base going forward in the UK.
Well, we all love Cornwall, Mr. Speaker, and also the incredible clean energy potential it has. I can confirm to my honourable friend that we'll be opening the new renewables auction in July. We see an incredibly bright future for floating wind, and we see Cornwall as absolutely at the centre of it.
Let the front benches change over. Just before I call the Chancellor to make the statement, can I just say to the House, as it's an opposition day, we don't normally do that, but it's so important. But I won't be running it long, so please help each other when we get to the back benches. And now come Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for granting me permission to make this statement to the House today about the government's continued response to the war in the Middle East. Let me start by paying tribute to our armed forces, and my thoughts and those of the whole House remain with them and those whose lives have been disrupted by this conflict. Since I last addressed this House, the costs of oil and gas have remained high. And last week, the Bank of England estimated that inflation could be between 3 and 3.5% in the next few quarters. The full economic impact of the war remains uncertain, but it makes our economic plan even more important. To build prosperity that is secure and resilient, and to bear down on the cost of living and protect the public finances. Delivered through our ironclad fiscal rules, and today I will set out further action that I am taking. First, on global collaboration. Last week, the Prime Minister authorised the US to use UK military bases to defend the Strait of Hormuz. It remains the case that the best way to protect families and businesses is rapid de-escalation of this conflict. And to strengthen our collective security, I have announced that we will explore a new defence financing and procurement mechanism with the Netherlands, Finland and other EU and NATO partners. I welcome the IEA decision to authorise a coordinated release of our collective oil reserves to alleviate the immediate pressure on supply. And the UK has now begun the release of our share of 13.5 million barrels of oil. Second, on our energy security. The last government's failure to invest in energy was a failure to protect our country. But through determined action, this government is taking control of our own energy supply. Investing in renewables, lifting the ban on onshore wind and streamlining grid connections. Running the biggest offshore wind auction in European history last year and bringing the next renewable auction forward to this July. And driving forward negotiation on the UK's participation in the EU internal electricity market. We must guarantee our domestic oil and gas industry can also play a role in our energy system for decades to come. And so I can confirm that we are encouraging investment in tiebacks to make the most of our existing production facilities. We're rewriting the story on nuclear too. Construction on Sizewell C, agreeing an extension to Sizewell B, and we're due to sign the contracts on the UK's first small modular reactors in Anglesey, in partnership with Rolls-Royce. I will not tolerate red tape and vested interests holding back our energy security. So our new planning rules will unblock the pipeline of critical infrastructure projects. I can announce today that we will legislate to implement the Finkelton Review in the next parliamentary session. And I recently wrote to industry and regulators to get them to set out their plans to fast-track that implementation in full. To the parties opposite, who like to talk big about energy security, but then vote against the very infrastructure to build it. Let me say this: it is time to put our country first. And I can confirm today that we are developing options to back critical energy projects with indemnities if their planning consent is challenged, so that we don't waste a single moment in protecting our energy security, because energy security is national security. Yeah. Third, on households and businesses. I know that when prices rise and incomes are squeezed, people look to the government and ask, what are you doing to help? That's why, since the election, we have delivered and funded 30 hours of free childcare to working parents, wages rising faster than prices for every month that I have been Chancellor, and free breakfast clubs being rolled out at our primary schools. From next week, the 2-child limit gone. Day one sick pay in, and another rise in the national living wage. Prescription charges frozen, train fares frozen, the fuel duty frozen, and the state pension increasing next week by £575. And for businesses, £4.3 billion in business rate support. The Regulation Action Plan cutting admin costs for businesses. And the supercharger discount, followed next year by the British Industrial Competitiveness Scheme to take money off business energy bills. But I know that there is more to do. On trade, I can confirm to the House that we are aiming to conclude negotiations with the EU this year on the sanitary and phytosanitary agreement, which will directly impact food prices in our shops. And I have asked officials to look at where there are targeted reductions to agri-food tariffs, which can help bring down food prices too, balancing this with implications on domestic producers and food security. And later this week, I am holding meetings with supermarkets and with banks to discuss how they can further support their customers. We have a world-class competition and consumer protection regime. And since my last statement, the Competition and Markets Authority have stepped up their statutory monitoring of fuel prices, and I will update on fuel pricing within the next month. They are working with government to monitor the cost of household essentials for both price rises and disruption, and they've launched a market study into heating oil. Today, I can announce that we are going further to make sure that the Competition and Markets Authority have the powers that they need that were denied to them by the previous government to detect and to crack down on price gouging, bringing in a new anti-profiteering framework and considering time-limited, targeted powers for the CMA and other regulators. This week, the Business Secretary and I will convene the Regulators' Council to discuss their work to protect consumers. Because let me say again, this government will not tolerate any company exploiting this crisis at consumers' expense. Finally, I want to update the House on how I am preparing for this conflict as it goes on. I know that families and businesses are worried about the impact of rising prices. I have said that we will be responsive to a changing world and responsible in the national interest. And today I want to set out in more detail what that means. First, responsive. We don't yet know what the full impact of this conflict will be. So we must be agile in responding appropriately at each moment. We extended the 5p fuel duty cut, and we have pushed out the cheaper fuel finder, empowering people to avoid rip-off prices and chasing down the last few filling stations to reach 100% compliance. And when wholesale kerosene prices more than doubled overnight, we stepped in with £53 million of support to those who needed it most within a matter of days. And from next week, Households will benefit from £150 off of their energy bills thanks to the action that I took in my budget, with a price cap giving households certainty on their bills until July, ahead of the winter months when people use 78% of their gas. Second, we will be responsible. The spring forecast showed that the government has the right economic plan, restoring stability to our country's finances and family finances. I will not put that stability at risk. As we respond to this crisis, we must learn the mistakes of the past. The previous government pushed up borrowing, interest rates, inflation and mortgage costs with an unfunded, untargeted package of support under Liz Truss. That gave the support to the most wealthiest of households. Between 2022 and 2024, under the last government, households in the top income decile received an average of £1,350 of direct energy bill support. That left us with high levels of national debt. A cheque written then for a bill that is still being paid today. I can confirm to the House that contingency planning is taking place for every eventuality, so that we can keep costs down for everyone and provide support for those who need it most, acting within our ironclad fiscal rules to keep inflation and interest rates as low as possible. Mr. Speaker, this is not a war that we started, nor is it a war that we joined, unlike the advice of the parties opposite. But it is a war that will have an impact on our country. The challenges may be significant, but I promise to do what is right and fair, being responsive in a changing world and responsible in the national interest. And I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Chancellor Melstride.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the Right Honourable Lady for advance sight of her statement. Mr. Speaker, the Right Honourable Lady comes to this House with an economy in tatters. She would have us believe that she has delivered the stability and resilience that can weather the storm ahead. But she has done nothing of the kind. When she came into office, she ramped up borrowing and spending and hiked taxes to record levels. She was warned at the time by the OBR and others that her policies would mean higher inflation, higher borrowing costs, higher interest rates, and that she would destroy jobs. All of that, Mr. Speaker, has come to pass. Her mismanagement and foolish choices have given us the highest inflation in the G7, the highest borrowing costs of any major advanced economy, with gilt yields higher than Greece and Morocco, fragile fiscal headroom, the highest unemployment since the pandemic and rising, and GDP per capita falling. Under this government, Mr. Speaker, we are getting poorer, and our economy is increasingly fragile and far from secure and resilient. And despite what the Right Honourable Lady has just said about tiebacks, nothing exemplifies this government's economic folly more than its approach to oil and gas. The utterly misguided net zero obsessions of the Energy Secretary have led to the absurdity of reduced extraction, whilst we see jobs destroyed, tax revenues foregone, and energy security smashed. And the greatest tragedy of all, Mr. Speaker, that in Jackdaw and Rosebank we have fields ready to go. In just months, they could be pumping vital relief to millions. Jackdaw alone has enough gas to supply over 1.5 million homes. Yet the Right Honourable Lady has nothing to say on that matter. And less oil and gas extraction means greater dependency and less security. This road leads to ruin. On energy, on the cost of living, on jobs, on growth, on public finances, on every measure that matters, this Chancellor has left us weak, weak, weak. And in the face of this energy shock, there are millions who are about to suffer as a result. So, with respect to her statement today, could I ask her, how many fuel retailers have yet to engage with the new fuel finder service? And can she comment on the widespread reports of technical glitches and out-of-date price information? She mentions a small modular reactor planned for Wilfer. But given the need, can she explain why she has chosen not to go ahead with the large-scale nuclear site that was signed off by the last Conservative government? And specifically on energy cost support, can I ask her, what fiscal capacity does the Right Honourable Lady believe she has to support those in need? What is her plan to ensure that any targeted approach truly reaches all those who are in need? And on the matter of targeting, in her statement, Mr. Speaker, the Chancellor criticised the last Conservative government support package for not being targeted. But what she failed to mention is that the now Prime Minister was then urging for support to be universal. Indeed, he said at that time that Labour's approach would ensure, and I quote, that no household would pay a penny more on their bills. No consistency from the Right Honourable Lady. How is she going to ensure that support for those depending on heating oil reaches those who need it most? This support, Mr. Speaker, will of course, under this government, be funded through the taxes of hard-working people. Indeed, the reduction to energy bills this April is simply being taken from bills and being dumped onto the shoulders of hard-pressed taxpayers. But it does not need to be this way. For is not the critical question this? Where is the control of public spending? Where is the renewed resolve to grasp the welfare bill, to get people off benefits and into work? I will tell you, Mr. Speaker, it is nowhere, because the Right Honourable Lady is a captive of her own backbenchers, and she has brought our economy one step from its knees. She knows it, the country knows it, and now we must all brace ourselves for what is to come. Not from a position of strength, as the Right Honourable Lady is so desperate to have us believe, but from a position of weakness, of her own making.
Chancellor of the Exchequer.
I think that statement only revealed that the Shadow Chancellor is utterly out of his depth. Mr. Speaker, in the last 20 months, we've had 6 cuts in interest rates. We have more than doubled the fiscal headroom compared with the headroom that I inherited from the party opposite. For the first time in 6 years, our deficit is less than 5% of GDP, and wages have increased by more than inflation for every single month that I have been Chancellor of the Exchequer, compared to the record of the previous Conservative government, which is the only parliament on record where people were poorer at the end of it than they were at the beginning. So I prefer my record to their record any day of the week. Now, Mr. Speaker, the Shadow Chancellor says that we should act. Well, we have acted. But what the Shadow Chancellor fails to mention is that his party supported us being involved in this conflict. Whilst we have called for de-escalation, the Leader of the Opposition said that we should be a participant in this conflict. The damage that that would have done to our economy would have been immense, and yet they make no apology for that. The Leader of the Opposition said yesterday about the Prime Minister that if he is creating a support package that is going to be done with taxpayers' money, then she thinks that we should be doing things that aren't going to cost the taxpayers money. So on the one hand, you've got the Shadow Chancellor saying that we should do more and put in more money, and then you've got the Leader of the Opposition saying we shouldn't do anything. So where do the party opposite now sit on the £53 million support that we gave on heating oil? Because that was using taxpayers' money to support those who needed it most. It was the right thing to do, but now the Leader of the Opposition seems to suggest that that was the wrong thing to do. Now, the Shadow Chancellor asked a few specific questions. On the cheaper fuel finder that we have introduced, more than 90% of retailers have now signed up to it, and of that 90%, all of them are updating their prices regularly, and we, along with the Competition and Markets Authority, are chasing down the final few that haven't submitted their prices. On small modular reactors, the party opposite say they supported it. They had 14 years and they put not a single penny of money into it. And the same is true of Sizewell C. You can't, on the one hand, say that you think that we should spend less money and then at the same time say that we should be supporting Sizewell C and small modular reactors, because everything has to be paid for. In terms of fiscal capacity, we have more than doubled the headroom compared to what I inherited from the Conservatives. It was less than £10 billion when I became Chancellor of the Exchequer. It is now nearly £24 billion because of the actions that I have taken. The Shadow Chancellor says that we haven't built contingency, where the exact opposite is the case. Now, the Shadow Chancellor says, what about Rosebank and Jackdaw? Well, it was because of the failure to do the work properly that it was challenged in the courts. And 1 month after the previous government left office because they were kicked out, the courts came back and said that we had to reconsider Scope 3 emissions. The energy companies, Shell and Equinor, resubmitted their plans at the end of last year. The regulators...
Oh, sorry. Between both of you, you can both go and have that discussion outside if you can't be quiet in here. Chancellor next.
This is important because the energy companies came back, thank you Mr Speaker, came back at the end of last year with their revised plans. The regulators are now considering those, and my right honourable friend, the Energy Secretary, will make a decision ahead of the autumn to decide whether it is legal to go ahead with those. But we made a commitment in our manifesto to honour existing licences. It's only because of the failure of the previous government to consult that we are in this position in the first place. And the honourable gentleman, the right honourable gentleman, says that if we cut the welfare bill, we will be able to help people. Well, I'm afraid they had 14 years, and he was the Welfare Secretary when the bills ballooned. So, frankly, we'll take no lessons from the party opposite. It is only Labour that can be responsive to the immediate challenges, because we have been responsible with the public finances, committed to our long-term energy security and committed to make the right decisions in the national interest.
Dave McHillier, Chair of the Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, as the Prime Minister said yesterday, we have no idea how long this conflict will be, and he is not assuming it will be over quickly. So we live in troubled times, and it's quite right that the Chancellor of the Exchequer is making serious contingency plans as we move through spring, summer and into autumn and winter. But one of the challenges of targeting support, as she well knows, is the data that's available. So what is she doing to make sure that the data is available to target support to those who need it most, not just across Whitehall, but in local government and in the energy companies themselves?
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and that is a really important point, because the previous government hadn't done the contingency planning, and so when the energy price shock came along, they said we're not going to do anything to support, we're not going to do anything to support, and so they in the end had a choice about doing nothing or providing blanket support. And it was that blanket support that cost £78 billion. What we have been doing is working with the Department for Work and Pensions, with local government and others to ensure that we will be able to target support at those who need it most. But that is in addition to what we have already done in taking £150 off of everyone's energy bills. We are doing the work. The prices come down in April for the following 3 months, and we are a long way off of the winter when 78% of gas is used by households.
Daisy Cooper, Liberal Democrat spokesperson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the Chancellor for advance sight of her statement, and our thoughts are also with our brave armed forces at this time. I agree that the last government's failure to invest in energy was a failure to protect our country. Today we face the stark reality where we cannot guarantee our national security, our energy security or our food security. When Liberal Democrats were in government, we launched the auction for onshore wind and we established the Green Investment Bank, helping drive down costs and quadruple renewable energy. The Conservatives' decision to scrap the Green Investment Bank has left our energy system more exposed and should be worn as a badge of shame. To shore up our energy security and to tackle the energy crisis, we Liberal Democrats have consistently argued for a three-pronged approach. First, to reduce energy demand by incentivising households and businesses to invest in energy efficiency without the tax penalties built into the business rate system or prohibitive upfront costs. Second, to fix the broken energy market that is unfairly inflating prices, especially for small businesses on our high streets. And third, to provide targeted support for the most vulnerable and for those with the highest energy needs. So I urge the Chancellor to consider our proposals. To create an energy security bank to offer low-interest loans for energy-saving improvements for households and small businesses, to reverse the cuts to home insulation programmes and to exempt business investment in energy efficiency from business rates calculations. Whilst action from the Competition and Markets Authority is welcome, it is not enough. Small businesses have been blocked from the best energy deals for years, well before Donald Trump started bombing Iran. Yet there has still been no CMA investigation into suppliers blocking access to these fair deals. So I ask the Chancellor again, will she please instruct the CMA to do this investigation without delay? On targeted support, families are fearful. Will the Chancellor consider zero-rating VAT on heating oil and LPG? Will she consider introducing a price cap mechanism for off-grid fuels? Will she commit to halving energy bills over the next decade by reforming pricing structures? And if bills rise to more than £400 a year, as some are warning, will the Chancellor commit to coming back to this House and outlining a broader support package so that all struggling households, or many struggling households, don't face a crippling hit of that scale?
I thank the Honourable Lady for her questions. Nick Clegg once said it will take 10 years to get nuclear power up and running, so there wasn't any point in doing it. It would only come in the 2020s. Well, imagine if that Deputy Prime Minister hadn't blocked investment in nuclear energy then, and we would be able to get the benefits of it today. But you had a chance when you were in government and you did absolutely nothing. And the party opposite opposed onshore wind, which is also helping to bring down bills. In terms of supporting investment in renewables and energy security, we have created the National Wealth Fund, which is prioritising investment in defence and also in energy security, including in things like critical minerals in Cornwall, carbon capture and storage, and the rollout of chargers for electric vehicles. And we have also put £14 billion into the Warm Homes Plan to help subsidise and support people to make energy improvements in their home to reduce their energy consumption and therefore reduce their bills, alongside the Warm Homes discount, where we have doubled the number of people who are eligible for it. On businesses, we are, through the business rates consultation, looking at improvement relief to ensure that if people do make improvements, including on energy efficiency, that they won't then be whacked with higher business rates. And on heating oil, the Honourable Lady said we should cut VAT on it. Well, when they were in government, they increased VAT on everything. So it's a bit rich to say that they want to cut it now. But we have asked the Competition and Markets Authority to do a review into heating oil, which I set out today, as well as the £53 million of support that we've put in. But there seems to be a sort of slight contradiction in what the Honourable Lady is saying, wavering between whether she wants targeted support or blanket support. And I would argue that the progressive universal approach that we're taking is the right one. £150 off everyone's energy bills, but then targeted support for those who need it most, because we cannot repeat what happened when Liz Truss was Prime Minister, because a cheque was written then and we are now paying the price with higher interest rates, inflation and taxes than we would otherwise have to have.
John Trickett.
Mr Speaker, and I welcome the Chancellor coming to the House as soon as possible to make a statement. But on profiting in the fuel sector, the last time there was a problem with oil prices was after the war had begun in the East. And the government then, following its laissez-faire market policies, allowed prices to rip to an extraordinary extent. And the consequence, as we saw, was outrageous profiteering within the energy sector. So, can the Chancellor indicate that we're not going to follow the failed laissez-faire ideology of the party opposite and intervene directly in the market to prevent outrageous profiteering occurring in this occasion?
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and that's why we have the Energy Profits Levy and the Electricity Generators Levy, so that we can claw back any excess profits. And it's also why, on this side of the House, we believe in an active and strategic state, including empowering our regulators, like the Competition and Markets Authority, to ensure that the price gouging that we've seen in the past is not able to happen after the conflict in the Middle East.
Sir Edward Lee, the Father of the House.
In an attempt to try and get some consensus here, may I commend one part of her statement, and I'm quoting, "We must guarantee our domestic oil and gas industry can play a role in our energy system for decades to come." Is there not a sort of sensible, middle-of-the-way approach here, that by all means we proceed with green energy, such as our offshore wind, where we lead the world in the North Sea off the Lincolnshire coast, but that we also have an open mind about extraction, new extraction from the North Sea? So will she confirm today, and I was listening very carefully to what she said in response to the Shadow Chancellor, that the Energy Secretary, when he considers these licences, will have an open mind so we can guarantee our resilience in the future?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his approach and his question. The oil and gas industry play an important role and will do for decades to come in our energy system. We very much welcome the jobs that they create, the tax revenue that they provide, but most importantly, the energy security that they offer. At my budget last year, I set out the new North Sea oil and gas strategy, which includes allowing the use of tiebacks or infills on existing sites. Now, for the reasons that I explained, we now have a quasi-judicial decision that the Secretary of State for Energy and Net Zero has to take on Rosebank and Jackdaw. But of course he will approach that with an open mind, because this government does recognise the importance of our oil and gas sector.
Ready?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Would my right honourable friend agree with me that the essential truth is that the government has introduced a package of measures to make the poorest families in Glasgow and across the United Kingdom better off, whereas the party opposite proposes to plunge these families back into extreme poverty? They lived us with ridiculous levels of debt and the weakest defence since the 1930s, and their record is absolutely shameful.
Well, my honourable friend is right, but I would say it's worse than that, because it's the legacy of two awful governments in Scotland. One who made people poorer, and then the SNP government that fails to back our nuclear sector, which could deliver cheaper bills for people in Scotland.
Sir Jeremy Hunt.
Could I gently ask the Chancellor to be less partisan at a time of crisis? If she brings before the House, difficult measures that are right for the country, she will have the support of the whole House. But if she is partisan, she won't. And I actually rise to support her basic instinct, which is for targeted rather than universal support. 4 years ago, energy bills were heading to £4,000. We are nothing like that. We don't know what the Oil price will be next week, let alone this winter. But most of all, although last time we gave support to households and families with her support by increasing borrowing, we cannot react to every single economic shock by further increasing our national debt. So will she confirm that when she comes to the House in her budget with targeted support, it will be fully funded and not funded by increasing yet again our national debt?
I thank the Right Honourable Gentleman for that question. When the Right Honourable Gentleman became Chancellor, it was on the back of lots of promises that there would be no support on energy bills. But the Honourable Gentleman and others recognised that that position was not sustainable. But work hadn't been done on how to introduce a targeted system. So the choice was a binary choice between blanket support or no support. And the Right Honourable Gentleman took the right approach then in ensuring that people's energy bills didn't go through the roof. But a target approach would be more appropriate because the top third of families under the previous approach got more than a third of the benefit. That's not right, it's not sensible, and all it does is drive up inflation, interest rates and taxes in the future. So it's not the fault of the former Chancellor that approach was taken, but we are using this period when energy prices are actually falling because of the approach I took in the budget to ensure that we are in a position in the autumn to have a targeted approach.
Luke Murphy.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I'm grateful to the Chancellor for her statement, particularly in setting out the long list of interventions this government has taken on the cost of living, which stands in stark contrast to the party opposite, who left the worst legacy on living standards in a generation. Can the Chancellor confirm that in the weeks and months to come, as she takes decisions encouraging regulators to take action and in contingency planning, that she will have that same thing in mind, protecting our constituents' living standards while also ensuring economic stability?
I thank my honourable friend for that question. And, you know, it's why what we did in the budget last year was so important, because in other countries, domestic energy bills are going up now. But because of the measures that I took in my budget last November, energy bills will fall from the 1st of April, despite everything that is happening in the Middle East. But I can tell you what would have the biggest impact on bills is if this conflict escalates, as the party opposite at the beginning wanted it to do.
Alistair Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Shetland is home to one of the largest onshore wind farms in the country, the operators of which are paid millions not to generate electricity because of grid constraints. So the announcement this morning of a trial in relation to discounted energy rates for communities such as ours will be one that will be met with some excitement, possibly. When are we going to hear the details of how that will work and what it will mean in terms of reductions to the bills of my constituents?
I thank the honourable gentleman for that question. On the issue of national grid infrastructure, which is why we end up paying for energy that can't be used, we've got to speed up those connections. And that's why today I said about consulting on indemnities for building out infrastructure, even in the case of judicial review, because we've got to act in the national interest and get this infrastructure built. But at the same time, the Secretary of State for Energy and Net Zero will set out more detail on the specific ways in which we can bring down prices for communities, including his.
Melinda Ward.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My constituents are appalled by supermarkets and other petrol retailers that are price gouging and profiteering out of global instability and a Middle East war that was backed by both the Tories and Reform. And let's make no mistake that if they were in government, our country would be right in the middle of it. Can the Chancellor set out the action she's taking to clamp down on price gouging? And can I thank her for the £9 million announced yesterday to help my constituents in Cowdenbeath and elsewhere affected by changes at Mossmoran?
I thank the honourable my honourable friend for those questions, and thank you for the campaigning work that she's done on Moss Moran to ensure that we can properly support her community, as we are also doing with the Growth Mission Fund. But we have introduced the cheaper fuel finder to ensure that price gouging doesn't happen by giving greater transparency to the prices offered by different fuel retailers. This is something that the previous government could have done in the last 14 years in a way that in France there is already a cheaper fuel finder available on all apps when you're travelling. We are introducing it because we want to ensure that our constituents have the lowest price possible when they fill up their tank.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given the current crisis, does the Chancellor regret in her first budget increasing by £150 billion over this Parliament the unfunded borrowing that the Office for Budget Responsibility said at the time was one of the largest fiscal loosenings of any fiscal event in recent decades?
Yeah. The party opposite once believed in fiscal discipline, but that has gradually eroded over time. It is because of the fiscal rules that I introduced that we've been able to invest in Sizewell C and in small modular reactors. That was not possible under the fiscal rules of the last government. But I would also say that borrowing fell in the last year. That didn't happen under the last few years of the previous Conservative government.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Chancellor for her statement, and I'm sure she'll agree with me that the biggest concern is the intersection between poverty and food and energy price hikes for our constituents. Will she look, as she prepares ahead, to a warm homes prescription so we can protect people's health by keeping their homes warm, which also saves money, and also ensuring sufficiency in the Crisis and Resilience Fund so local authorities can really invest in those in the greatest need?
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and of course from next month families with children will benefit from the abolition of the two-child cap within the universal credit system. We've also doubled the number of people who can get the warm homes discount and put £14 billion into upgrading people's homes through the warm homes plan. But of course, as we look at targeted support, we will look at vulnerabilities within that.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. The Chancellor has mentioned several times about households benefiting from £150 off, but I have a constituent on the phone this morning who's been told that his energy bills are still rising and they are not seeing the savings that the Chancellor is talking about. What conversations is she having with energy companies to make sure that they do actually benefit from that fall in bills that she is very keen to talk about?
Well, I'd be very happy to see the particular details of that constituent because energy companies are both through fixed and variable tariffs passing on the £150 reduction that I brought in the budget by getting rid of the eco levy entirely and moving other levies from bills onto general taxation. So happy to look at the particular circumstances, but on average people should be getting £117 cut in their energy bills from April the 1st.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the Chancellor for her statement. We have indeed, as she says, made good progress on stabilising our fiscal and economic situation since the election in 2024, most notably increasing the headroom available in our public finances, but as a result of the last government failing to invest in sustainable energy and nuclear, we are much more exposed to price shocks than we could be. Would she agree with me that it's vital that we do all we can to protect the most vulnerable in our community, such as constituents of mine in Dartford, from the price hikes in energy that will result from this Middle East war?
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and for his constituents in Dartford and around the country. There have been 6 cuts in interest rates since the general election, and more than doubling of the headroom means that we have a bit more room for manoeuvre in the face of shocks. But I would also say, because of the actions of this government, gas is setting the price for energy a third less than it was just 4 years ago because of the investment in renewables that this government are making.
John Glenn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the targeted nature of the measures announced, but 3 weeks ago it looked like inflation was going to return to the level that the Right Honourable Lady inherited when she took office in July 2024. That no longer is going to happen. But also, we see now the cost of borrowing, and given we're spending well over £100 billion a year on debt interest, what assessment has the Chancellor made of the implications of higher inflation and higher borrowing costs for the public finances?
I thank the Right Honourable Gentleman for that question, and it is because of those concerns and not wanting to put any upward pressure on borrowing costs or inflation that we are looking at what targeted support can be offered rather than the blanket support the previous time that energy bills went up. The Bank of England offered their assessment on potential impacts on inflation, but as the Governor of the Bank of England has also said, the upward pressure on inflation because of the conflict in the Middle East is tempered somewhat by the action that I took in my budget last year, which reduces inflation between 0.4 and 0.5 percentage points, taking some of that upward pressure on inflation off.
Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the Chancellor for her statement. Can I ask her to do something for a specific group of people, and that is people in the private rented market who have to rent their home, and especially in more deprived communities like mine, their energy bills are going to go up, but still their biggest outgoing each month will be their rent. And it is too often exploitative in areas like mine. We had rent controls in this country from the First World War up until the dying days of Margaret Thatcher. What can she do, thinking outside the box, to tackle this issue?
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and I recognise that in his constituency, like mine and many others, more people are in private rented accommodation than own their own home. One of the reasons why we introduced the Renters' Rights Act, opposed by the party opposite, is to give people greater certainty and to be able to challenge increases in their rents, as well as greater rights over eviction to exactly help constituents of his and all of ours.
Dougal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just 3 weeks ago at the spring statement, I cautioned the Chancellor that significant fiscal intervention would be required to protect businesses and households in the face of this war in the Middle East. And she said at that time that thanks to her actions, the finances of the UK were in robust condition. Now she prevaricates in order to protect those self-same public finances. The two things can't be true at the same time. 13% of constituents in Angus and Perthshire Glens are on oil, 5% in Scotland, 2% in England and 0% in Leeds West and Pudsey. Perhaps that's why she's provided 53 million to support oil users, where that won't even touch the sites.
It took 200 days for the previous government to act on heating oil. It took us under 2 weeks, with £53 million, and that money allocated based on the usage of heating oil in different parts of the country. So there will be no help for my constituents in Leeds West and Pudsey from the £53 million of heating oil, because we don't use it. But there will be support for Scottish constituencies, Northern Irish constituencies and many others as well, because it is the right thing to do.
Mr. Speaker, it is expected that food inflation will hit 4%. Now, that means that a typical family's annual grocery bill will increase by approximately £240. And in Scotland, there are approximately 1 million people that have experienced food insecurity in the last year. Food insecurity is closely linked to access and consumption of fruit and vegetables. And the Chancellor said that she is going to meet with supermarkets. Can I ask, what will the asks and demands be so that people can get improved access to nutritious and affordable food?
Well, from April the 1st, from next week, the two-child limit within universal credit will go, and food banks have said that will reduce the reliance of families with children on food banks, and that, of course, is a very good thing. There is also more that government could do to try and bring down food inflation, including getting a sanitary and phytosanitary deal with the EU, and we're committed to achieve that this year. That will would bring down prices in the shops. It's opposed by the Conservatives and Reform because of their ideological dislike of the European Union, but it's the right thing to do to reduce food inflation for all of our constituents.
Thank you
very much, Mr. Speaker. The sad truth is this. The Chancellor weakened the UK economy with her tax-busting budgets and her jobs tax, and this Middle East crisis has exposed that. Further, the Energy Secretary's actions are making it worse, and he's just refused to maximise drilling in the North Sea and issue new licences, which would give much needed energy security and affordability in the UK. So will she now see sense and overrule those decisions of his?
Since I became Chancellor, we've had 6 cuts in interest rates, and for every month that I've been Chancellor, wages have risen faster than prices compared to the previous Parliament, when people were worse off at the end than they were at the beginning. And if the Right Honourable Lady believed in energy security so much, why was she part of a government that refused to fund small modular reactors or Sizewell C and opposed onshore wind, the cheapest form of energy? If she believes in energy security, she should back it.
Andrew Cooper.
Speaker, my constituents are being exploited by unscrupulous petrol retailers who are not letting a crisis go to waste. A BP in Winsford, unleaded is 10 pence more per litre than the cheapest in the area. At Shell in Middlewich, it's 15 pence more per litre. Does the Competition and Markets Authority have the power it needs to clamp down on this unscrupulous behaviour?
So we've introduced the cheaper fuel finder to ensure that you have information like this, and most crucially, your constituents have information like this. Already in France, you can see on any map, on an app on your phone or your sat-nav, the different prices of petrol at different filling stations. And that is where we will be in just a few weeks' time, once we have got that technology to work with those companies. The previous government had 14 years to do something like that. Other countries have, but we were without that facility. Being able to do that means that all of our constituents can make sure that we fill up at the cheapest cost.
Obviously, you didn't mean me, I know that. Don't worry, Gavin Robinson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. May I thank the Chancellor for recognising the disproportionate reliance on home heating oil in Northern Ireland, but recognise that the £17 million made available for 500,000 homes reliant on oil equates to £34 per household, and there's no data to target that support. The £81 million available from the renewables obligation for electricity, we were told by the Prime Minister and the Northern Ireland Secretary of State that that could be targeted, and yet Treasury officials are blocking that. I would ask her to look at that again. She's made the commitment not to reinstore the 5 pence of duty on fuel. Could I ask her to look at red diesel? Could I ask her to look at taking a look at the rebate for red diesel to help support construction and transport and haulage and energy regeneration in our country, to stimulate those parts of our economy that have a disproportionate reliance and have lost the support they so gravely needed?
I thank the honourable gentleman for that question. On heating oil, thank you for what he said, and obviously a disproportionate amount of that support has gone to Northern Ireland, given the greater reliance, and we encourage local authorities to use that money to target it at those who need it the most, and at the same time to ensure that everybody is supported. The Competition and Markets Authority are doing an urgent review to make sure that there is not price gouging going on. But we acted in a matter of days on heating oil, and that was the right thing to do. On red diesel, when we froze the fuel duty, we also took action on red diesel, but of course happy to ensure that the relevant minister meets with the honourable gentleman to talk further about what needs to be done.
Well, let's speed it up. Harpreet Tuppel.
Mr. Speaker, the Chancellor will be aware that we have a strong manufacturing sector in Huddersfield and in Yorkshire, including in defence and SMEs, but they are feeling the pressure of rising costs, and the Middle East war has seen input prices go up and disrupted supply chains. So can I ask how she's particularly supporting manufacturers?
My honourable friend is right about the importance of manufacturing in Huddersfield and more widely across Yorkshire. From the beginning of April, we are introducing the supercharger, which will take £420 million off the energy bills of the most energy-intensive industries, and the British Industrial Competitiveness Scheme comes in next year, which will help, I think, over 5,000 businesses.
I'll tell the chance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The fuel price shock that we're seeing caused by Trump's reckless war, highlights just how risky it is for the UK to be locked into these global fossil fuel markets. And of course, the CCC just recently pointed out that the cost of achieving net zero by 2050 is less than the cost of a single fossil fuel price spike, reinforcing the point we need to invest in the clean green technologies and get ourselves off being hooked on fossil fuels. Now, we've got a key problem in the UK because gas is coupled to electricity prices. Decoupling those prices is crucial. Will the Chancellor look at the report last week from Commonwealth that points out that decoupling could be achieved right now and would save households at least £200 each? Yes.
Thank the honourable lady for that question, and I agree that de-escalation is the best way to reduce bills for families and businesses. I would just gently say to the honourable lady, we want investment in renewables, and that's why we introduced the Planning and Infrastructure Act to make it easier to build them. But her party voted against that, which is keeping people's bills higher than they need to. We have had a third reduction in gas imports, and gas is setting the price of our energy something like a third less than it was just 4 years ago. And the electricity generators levy and the energy profits levy is ensuring that excess profits are taxed, and we can use that money to support the public finances and public services.
Justin Mathers.
Mr. Speaker, the consumer-focused, pragmatic approach by this government is such a contrast to the rhetoric of some on the benches opposite who would only see military action escalate and be in no doubt that it would be our constituents who would pay the price for that. So in respect of the CMA, I welcome the report this morning about what action they're taking to tackle rip-off debt fees, but that report took several years. So in respect of the new powers that the Chancellor's announced today from the CMA to tackle price gouging, can she confirm that the CMA will be able to act swiftly, nimbly, in real time to tackle companies who seek to exploit this particular crisis?
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and it's absolutely right. The gung-ho approach of the party opposite would have made this crisis worse, not better. And our approach, diplomatically, has been to de-escalate this crisis at every stage, in part because we don't want that cost of living impact on families. In terms of the Competition and Markets Authority, as my honourable friend knows, we met them a couple of weeks ago to talk through what more can be done with cheaper fuel finder to roll that out, to investigate the impact on heating oil, and within the next few weeks the CMA will be coming back after that investigation and looking more widely about how to keep prices down for all of our constituents.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The £474,000 awarded to Dorset Council last week as part of the Chancellor's announcement is welcome, but I must tell her it really won't touch the sides, and more is going to need to be done to support rural communities. Unwillingly and unwittingly, the government is going to be profiteering from this by having a massive hike in VAT and duty take. Could I urge the Chancellor, because this would not add to government borrowing, to ring-fence either in whole or great part those excess receipts that she will be receiving, to ring-fence to support rural communities across the country as they face into this cost of living crisis?
Good question.
Thank you for what the honourable gentleman said about heating oil, and as well as the direct support for his local authority and many others, the CMA work is also crucial to stop businesses exploiting this crisis to increase profits. And as I said in the answer to the previous question, the CMA will be reporting on that shortly. What I would just say about ring-fencing certain tax revenues, it's clearly the case that a prolonged conflict is going to reduce other tax revenues and push up borrowing costs. So it's not possible to ring-fence a particular tax for a particular use because other tax revenues are going to be coming down. But the whole reason we have the energy profits levy and the electricity generators levy is to have some sort of stabilisation in the system to bring in money to support the government and our constituents when it's most needed. And of course we'll be using it to do that.
Speaker, can I thank my right honourable friend for the serious approach he's taken to this conflict, unlike the hokey-cokey approach we've seen from the party opposite. Peterborough is willing to play its part developing our energy infrastructure, and we've already had £1 billion worth of private investment to upgrade the gas networks based out of Peterborough. But my constituents will know the price hike is not just about what's happening now in the Middle East. It's about a decade where we have not built the energy infrastructure this country needs. Will she reassure me that her plans today will speed up new nuclear, speed up investment in renewables and get this country building the energy infrastructure we need if we're to tackle this for the long term?
Thank my honourable friend for that question. And it's great to see that investment coming into Peterborough, supported by my honourable friend in the gas networks. And that's in stark contrast to the party opposite, who got rid of our gas storage facilities, stalled on nuclear, stalled on renewables, and as a result has left us more vulnerable to an energy price shock.
Question, Ben Lake.
Speaker, what contingency planning is taking place to support non-domestic energy bills, especially in rural areas such as mine, where a great number of small businesses, community organisations rely on heating oil and LPG?
The best thing we can do to support households and businesses, and I'm sure he will agree, is to de-escalate this crisis and bring it to an end as quickly as possible. But as I've set out in my statement today, I will not tolerate businesses price gouging and earning excessive profits because of the conflict of the Middle East. That's why we've got the CMA with new powers to ensure that that doesn't happen, and why we are targeting support at those who most need it.
Can I? Point of order, Sir David Davis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. After the financial crash in 2009, a banker called Tom Hayes was wrongly sent to prison. Last July, the Supreme Court overturned his conviction, and in January they instructed the government to pay him just shy of £300,000. He has still not been paid, not because the government is disputing the sum, but because they can't agree amongst themselves which department should make the payment. So he cannot get an answer as to what's going to happen with him. I cannot get an answer. I don't even know which minister to approach because of the dispute, the wrangle going on inside the government. I've written to Lord Chancellor. His department tells me I'm not going to get an answer at least until the middle of next month. So can you tell me, Madam Deputy Speaker, how I can establish the responsible department so that this House can get a proper answer to how this injustice is going to be resolved?
Can I thank the right honourable member for his point of order? In the first instance, he may wish to consult the clerks in the table office for advice as to how he can best elicit a response. But he might also like to raise this with the Leader of the House at Business Questions, who will then be able to ensure that the question is directed to the correct government department. Point of order, Sir John Hayes.
Very grateful, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I rise as the chairman of the All-Party Group on Acquired Brain Injury, concerned about the news that 287 patients from a hospital in Northampton are to be reallocated across the country. NHS England have told local health bosses the hospital isn't fit for purpose, and so they must reallocate these people. Many are brain injured. The member from Northampton South is very concerned about this because many are his constituents. Given that you probably haven't had notice of a statement from the government about this, how can I draw it to the House's attention beyond this? And how can ministers be asked to come here to explain what they're going to do about this woeful situation?
Can I thank the right honourable member for his point of order? He is quite right. I certainly have had not had any notice of a statement on this. But of course, he can raise this at health questions. Again, the advice, he can raise this with the Leader of the House. But he has certainly done an excellent job of highlighting the issue. I believe also in debates which I have listened to, and I'm sure the Treasury bench has heard him this afternoon. Point of order, Bel Ribeiro Addy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Tomorrow, the 25th of March, is the UN's International Day of Remembrance of the victims of slavery in the transatlantic slave trade. The Ghanaian government's resolution declaring the transatlantic slave trade as a crime against humanity, backed by the African Union, CARICOM and a growing global coalition, will be debated. Given our nation's central role in the trafficking and enslavement of African peoples, a vote against would be a betrayal of every life it consumed. This House has never debated this. How can we be certain that our UN vote reflects the will of this Parliament and, more importantly, the will of this country? Madam Deputy Speaker, how can we ensure decisions of this magnitude taken in our name receive the democratic consideration they deserve before a vote is cast?
Can I thank the Honourable Lady for her point of order? As she will know, the government conducts diplomatic relations in the United Nations under Crown prerogative. Nevertheless, she has placed her concerns on the record and the front bench will have heard them. Of course, as this House has not debated the issue, she might do well to apply for a backbench business debate, or alternatively to raise it in Westminster Hall, or indeed with the Leader of the House at business questions. Which brings us to the 10-minute rule motion. Kirstine Sullivan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to require that personal protective equipment procured and provided by public sector and associated bodies must comply with standard BS 30417/2025 or an equivalent specified standard and for connected purposes. I bring this bill to the House today as a proud member of the GMB Union. We all know the importance of personal protective equipment. It is the final defence against unavoidable risks in the workplace. But what's not always appreciated is that employees across the UK are routinely working without fit-to-form PPE, compromising safety and hindering productivity. BS 30417, developed by the British Standards Institution, is guidance that puts fit-to-form PPE as a consideration at every stage of purchasing, supply and use. Madam Deputy Speaker, our workforce is not homogeneous. Employees are not all male, 5'9" and 85 kilos, and even then, PPE is often designed for a taller man. Whether preparing food, handling chemicals, building houses, healing patients or fighting fires, too many are given inadequate PPE. Boots too big, they become trip hazards. Gloves too large, they can't grip properly, or high-vis jackets so cumbersome they restrict movement. While some employers offer inclusive PPE, it's time for us to put our money where our mouth is. Enshrining the BSI's new PPE standard or the industry equivalent in public procurement sends a very clear message to employers and manufacturers that the future of work and PPE is inclusive. Over the past year and a half, I have met with women across industries, health services, firefighters, police, armed services, engineering. They are exasperated at poor fit PPE and often the ridicule that comes with it. Take something as simple as sizing. The smallest glove size available on the market is still too large for 86% of female hands. That's not just inconvenient and cumbersome, it's unsafe. Many women doing training drills on ladders, handling hoses and ropes, find them impossible as the gloves are simply too big to allow for a secure grip. Running into a burning building is something few of us would ever want to face, but our firefighters do this daily. Amidst an attack, running towards danger is something few of us would do, but our police officers do this daily. Handling soiled linen and cleaning up bodily waste is something most of us avoid where possible, but our carers, nurses and medical professionals do this daily. Madam Deputy Speaker, one Scottish firefighter came to me with her experience of running into burning buildings, but the service didn't have any female fit fire boots.
This is intolerable, a dangerous trip hazard in a perilous situation. In basic frontline protection, we are failing women who are putting their lives on the line. And the horror stories go on. Stab vests, predominantly designed to fit men, they're simply inadequate to fit the body shape of female police officers. Ordinarily, they're too big and too loose. When running, the stab vest slides up and down, hitting against their neck and chin, an encumbrance slowing them down in moments of danger. In one case, a knife slipped under a police officer's garment and she was hospitalised with severe stab wounds. Alternatively, officers are forced to tie them so tight it impairs their breathing. Madam Deputy Speaker, others spoke of needing to alter their PPE just to make it fit. This completely compromises their safety and makes the worker legally liable for accidents on site due to wearing PPE incorrectly. And that's before we even talk about the lack of well-fitting protective clothing for people with disabilities, religious and cultural requirements, and men who don't fit the average size. Women in war zones have reported their oversized body armour cutting their thighs when sat in vehicles traversing rocky terrain, or helmets falling over their eyes. We should not expect our service personnel to enter combat zones if we cannot deliver the body armour and fitted head protection that can save lives. Madam Deputy Speaker, whilst these examples are not limited to public services, the purchasing power of the state represents a sizable portion of the market. The purchase of PPE for our council, care workers, firefighters, armed services and police. This bill will put people at the forefront of PPE procurement, ensuring true fit-to-form protection from sparks and burns, waste and disease, machinery and chemicals. Madam Deputy Speaker, I would like to give special thanks to the people who put so much work into the new BSI standard and helped me learn all things PPE, a subject that was not my forte